The child was born in silence, no scream, no cry, only the trembling candlelight on the midwife's face as she whispered, "Another one." In the winter of 1798, the air over St. Elmo Parish in southern Maryland froze heavy with dread. Within the stone walls of the Walsh estate, an imposing manor overlooking the Chesapeake, another infant entered the world. Locals swore the Walsh children were born under bad stars. But this one, the fifth in 5 years, arrived with a peculiar mark above the left eye, a circle of scar tissue already formed like a seal. The attending midwife, Margaret Connolly, never returned to her home in Baltimore. Her horse was found grazing outside the estate. Her gloves lay on the floor of the birthing room, damp with blood and bile. The family said she fled in madness, but there were no records, no sightings, no farewell. The Walsh family sent a letter to the church 3 days later requesting a private baptism, officiated not by the village priest but by a physician from Vienna. The townspeople whispered a name that hadn't been spoken since colonial times, Galenist. And for the next 46 years, no outsider would see the lower floor of the Walsh estate again. The patriarch of the family, Dr. Nathaniel Walsh, was not a physician by license, but by legacy. Descended from English anatomists who performed dissections on the condemned, Nathaniel brought a philosophy of blood, bone, and secrecy to Maryland. He kept a black leather-bound ledger not for finances, but for experiments. Town records confirm he held no official post, yet autopsies, chemical burns, and irregular bone grafts were rumored to be conducted in the manor's basement. That ledger would come to be known in whispered circles as the Codex Obscuri Medicorum. A traveling Jesuit friar, Father Claudius, who came to investigate rumors of unsanctioned burials, was shown the book. 3 days later, he threw himself into the marsh behind the parish house. Before dying, he scrawled a message in Latin on the rectory wall using a sharpened nail. "The soul is not found where the blood is cold." The church quietly sealed off his writings. The Walsh family buried another infant that same week, unbaptized. And by then, the villagers had begun reporting a strange sound echoing from the manor's west wing at night. A low, rhythmic clicking, like surgical instruments, tapping. The Blue Room of the Walsh Manor was named for its faded tapestry and deep cobalt curtains. No servant entered it, and yet, according to family records unearthed during a probate battle in 1861, 14 different children were documented as living and dying within its walls between 1798 and 1815. Only 5 were biologically Walsh, the others, no baptismal certificates, no family names, just initials M, T, C, H, A, S, L, W, E, E. Their origins remain unknown. Church records show no adoptions, no orphan transfers. The youngest, M.T., was 11 months old at death, his skull reportedly fractured and stitched back together with wire. The cause of death, cranial maladjustment. In the spring of 1812, a housemaid named Eliza fled barefoot into the town square, shrieking that the children weren't speaking words anymore, but sounds like machines. She was found clutching a crucifix so tightly it embedded into her palm. Eliza never spoke again. The Walsh family claimed she had fallen ill with female hysteria, but a parish gravedigger claimed he unearthed tiny coffins with wax lips stitched shut and teeth that didn't seem to belong to children at all. In 1801, Dr. Walsh quietly funded the expansion of St. Elmo's Parish into a medical refuge for the infirm. What was once a modest rectory now bore iron doors, slate, gray walls, and a 12-foot underground tunnel leading directly to the Walsh estate. The town believed it was a charitable gesture, but nurses who worked the hidden ward described something else entirely, a cold chamber with no beds, where children were brought in gagged and carried out covered in salt water, soaked linen. One nurse, Miss Johanna Rives, left a private letter to her sister that read, "He says they must be reminded of the womb before the mind can be cleansed. I held a girl while she screamed through a steel bit. Her eyes rolled back and he whispered, The nerve must forget to remember. That same week, Miss Rives vanished during her shift. A young altar boy later claimed he saw her hand sticking out of a shallow grave behind the chapel, but when investigators dug, they found only twisted surgical tubing and several animal vertebrae. In 1803, during a midnight storm, villagers reported hearing organ music echoing from the Walsh estate. Odd, considering the chapel had been closed for years. A few bold townsfolk crept close and saw candles flickering in strange rhythmic intervals from the stained glass windows. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, like some forgotten code. Later, a defrocked seminarian named Elias Morgan confessed to local clergy. He had been paid to assist in a private mass inside the Walsh chapel, but it wasn't Catholic and it wasn't Christian. Elias claimed they used blood in place of wine, and a child's preserved femur in place of the host. The congregation, medical men in black aprons and masked women humming in Latin verse, their eyes white with opium. Elias was found hanging from the bell tower 3 days later, a cauterized hole in the center of his chest. Not from suicide, from something precise. The church sent no further inquirers to the Walsh estate after that. It was left to rot in opulence and silence, but the organ music played again, exactly 1 year later. In 1805, a fire broke out in the records room of St. Elmo's Clinic. Suspiciously, only one item was completely destroyed, volume Roman II of Dr. Walsh's medical ledger, the years detailing 1800 through 1803. According to a surviving clerk, pages had been added in languages he couldn't decipher, fragments of Greek, Aramaic, and what appeared to be surgical notation fused with alchemical symbols. One diagram showed the human brain split into 7 compartments, each labeled with a sin. And a tool, among the tools, ice pick, ivory clamp, glass needle, sound fork. The clerk fled the clinic that night and was later found wandering the marshes, teeth shattered, whispering, "He's peeling minds like fruit," starting from the stem. Rumors spread that the missing ledger wasn't burned at all, but taken. By whom? Some claimed the church, others believed it was Dr. Walsh's eldest son, Abram, who had grown distant and cold, seen walking the estate's perimeter at night, muttering measurements under his breath. After the fire, Abram vanished from public life for 9 years. In 1807, a traveling surgeon from New York, Dr. Hiram Locke, was invited by Dr. Walsh to witness a rare condition in a child patient. What he saw was not a condition, it was a reversal of nature. The boy, around 7, had blood so thin it ran like ink. No scabs formed, no bruises darkened, but beneath the skin, a strange webbing of dark purple veins throbbed unnaturally with every heartbeat. Dr. Locke described the child's pupils as static, as if he wasn't perceiving but only recording. Locke wrote, "When I asked his name, the boy said I was M.T. before the last wash." He repeated it 3 times. The next morning, Locke's throat was slit, surgically. No blood was spilled. His body was displayed in the clinic chapel with his eyes removed and placed carefully into his coat pocket. The case was never investigated. The Walsh family hosted a private requiem, and no mention of M.T. was ever made again. St. Elmo's housed a cloistered convent behind the main clinic. 6 nuns, all sworn to silence. In 1810, Sister Emmeline, a novice barely 20, broke that vow and fled into town with blood, stained hands, and a splintered rosary. She burst into the parish, screaming that they had taken the voice of a child and sealed it inside the walls. Father Howard, the presiding priest, recorded her testimony in Latin, until 2 men in black carriages arrived from the Walsh estate. They took Emmeline in silence. The next Sunday during Mass, something in the church organ wheezed between the hymns, a rasping childlike voice calling for air. Days later, the convent bell rang 33 times at midnight. No one pulled the rope. When Father Howard entered the chapel, he found Sister Emmeline's veil nailed to the cross, her jawbone tucked behind it. The Vatican never responded to the parish's plea. A family portrait painted in 1008 still hangs in the Maryland Historical Society, untouched, unsigned, but authenticated. What disturbs viewers most isn't the stern expressions of Nathaniel and his children, but the blurred fourth child whose face appears, unfinished, not painted over, but scratched away, with surgical precision. Art historians confirmed the child's image had been removed with a scalpel. Closer inspection revealed a thin trail of dried blood beneath the oil paint, as if the portrait itself had been part of a dissection. Stranger still, each year the eyes of the remaining children seemed to fade slightly more, not from exposure, but from inside the canvas. One museum night guard claimed he heard faint knocking from the portrait room. When he opened the door, the frame of the painting was steaming. The logbook that night simply read, "The child wants back in." In 1814, after nearly a decade missing, Abram Walsh returned, dressed in black linen, clean, shaven, and with not a wrinkle on his face despite now being over 30. But what terrified townsfolk wasn't his appearance, it was his silence. He spoke only when absolutely necessary, and even then, in terms that made no sense. The third switch has held. Auditory tension is declining, and once, all that remains is the soul's fracture point. Abram immediately took over the clinic and instituted a program he called neurospiritual purification. It involved placing children in darkness for 7 days while their senses were realigned. On the 8th day, those who survived returned mute, their eyes clouded with a milky film. Some wandered into the river. Others scratched symbols into the walls of their home, symbols later found in Mesopotamian exorcism scrolls. The town sheriff petitioned to shut the clinic down. He disappeared 2 nights later. In 1815, a flood swept through the Walsh estate's lower corridors. When townspeople volunteered to help remove debris, a young boy named Isaac Connell uncovered a sealed wooden box. Inside, a single human eye suspended in amber fluid, still fresh, still staring. Beneath it was a faded label that read, "Subject L. W. Vocal retraction complete." The eye was reportedly warm to the touch. His mother, horrified, took the box straight to Father Howard. The priest locked it in the church crypt that night, but by morning the box was open, and the eye was gone. In its place was a note, written in blood, "The eye sees when the voice is sealed." Later that year, Isaac began waking in the night, screaming in a voice not his own, a young girl's, speaking in 18th century French. The doctors diagnosed epilepsy. He was found dead in the parish well 3 weeks later. His eyes had been removed, surgically. By 1816, the Walsh estate operated like a private sanatorium. Wealthy families from across the mid-Atlantic sent difficult children to the manor for treatment. Girls who heard voices, boys who refused to speak. One child was sent simply for drawing clocks with no hands. They were told the Walsh method was revolutionary, a mix of surgical hypnosis, cranial manipulation, and neurological cleansing. But not one child ever returned. Parents received letters, some handwritten, others typed, that the children had either succumbed to illness or chosen a monastic life abroad. The explanations were hollow. One father hanged himself after receiving a package that contained his son's molars, arranged in the shape of a cross. Decades later, 14 child-sized skeletons were discovered under the flagstones of the estate's northern corridor. Each skull bore signs of intentional cranial flattening, as though their very thoughts had been pressed out of them. In 1817, the townspeople had had enough. Rumors swelled. Children vanishing, mothers going mad, servants locking themselves in cellars. One night, led by a group of former patients' families, 50 armed men stormed St. Elmo's clinic. They found it empty. No nurses, no doctors, no patients, just a trail of blood-soaked linen leading into the underground tunnel toward the estate. Inside the clinic chapel, they discovered rows of open surgical journals, each marked with a different child's name. On the altar sat a massive black metronome, ticking with unnatural force. Beneath it, a dissected infant's skull fused with iron plates. Then, the ticking stopped. Half of the men went blind that week. 3 took their own lives before sunrise. One survivor swore he could still hear the metronome every time his heart beat. He died screaming during Mass the following Sunday. When investigators finally entered the Walsh estate, they expected dust and rot. Instead, they found freshly drawn baths, burning candles, chalk markings on the floors indicating anatomical measurements. One room contained nothing but surgical restraints and portraits of the Walsh children, each one missing the mouth. The kitchen pantry was empty, no food, no dishes, but the root cellar beneath it held a dozen glass jars of preserved human organs, labeled in Latin, cor infantum, pulmo, cerebrum, glandulae. One jar was still warm to the touch. According to urban legend, the house didn't just shelter evil, it fed off it. Dogs refused to enter. Priests who blessed the entryway returned violently ill. A local botanist planted lavender around the perimeter. Within 3 days, it had withered black. The Walsh estate wasn't abandoned. It was hollowed, like a body with the bones removed, yet somehow still standing. In 1819, a surviving document from the Codex surfaced in a private London auction. It described a procedure known only as twin ventricle transfer, the surgical creation of a child with 2 functioning hearts, supposedly to increase emotional endurance during extreme trauma. The notes were signed A. Walsh D.O. Beneath the signature, a sketch showed a pale child strapped to a gurney, one heart beating in the chest, the second sewn into the abdomen, pulsating out of sync. Historians dismissed the text as madness. But in 1821, an unmarked grave was uncovered during renovations at the estate. Inside was the skeleton of a child with 2 rib cages and copper wire threaded through the spine. Dr. Leona Brack, who led the exhumation, died that night in her hotel room. Her notes were burned. Her assistant disappeared en route to Washington. No one has ever spoken publicly about that second heart again. The Walsh Manor had many rooms, but only one was locked from the inside. Servants referred to it as the 7th door. No key could open it. No axe could break it. One boy, a gardener's apprentice, tried to peer through its keyhole. He collapsed within minutes, eyes bloodshot, whispering he's still learning to be human. Inside that room, it's said, Abram Walsh performed something darker than surgery, ritualized inversion, where pain was restructured into perception and language was replaced by instinct. When the door finally opened in 1825 during a storm, they found nothing. Only walls covered in claw marks, and on the floor, a mirror that reflected the room, but not the person standing in it. That mirror was shattered and buried in 7 pieces across the churchyard. None have been recovered. By 1828, only one member of the Walsh family remained, Agnes Walsh, Nathaniel's youngest daughter. She had not spoken since age 6. In a letter dated March 3, 1828, her only known communication, she wrote, "They made me watch when the soul was removed. It does not scream, it peals." 3 days later, she injected herself with a cocktail of mercury, laudanum, and unrefined opium, then walked into the Chesapeake Bay. Her body was never recovered, but days later, the water near the Walsh Pier turned black. Fish died. The fog that rolled in that week never lifted for 5 months. Locals said they could still see a figure beneath the surface, suspended and swaying. A girl with her mouth sewn shut. The church declared the bay cursed. In 1831, the federal government ordered the Walsh estate permanently sealed. Steel plates were bolted over windows. Entryways were lined with salt and ash. The basement was flooded with concrete. To this day, no one knows who signed the order. In 1924, an excavation company attempted to drill near the property line for a water main. Their equipment failed. 3 workers suffered strokes. 1 went blind. That same night, a thin trail of blood was seen running down from the estate's chimney. Though no fire had been lit in over a century, the land is still listed as restricted biohazard level 5. But there is no known agency attached to the classification. In 1943, during WW2 training exercises, a military patrol accidentally set foot on the edge of the Walsh property. One soldier reported hearing children crying beneath the earth. Another claimed he heard surgical instructions in his sleep, in his mother's voice. They found an old phonograph buried near the manor's western wall. It played only one sentence on loop: "The memory has been cleansed. Begin again." The next day, 2 men shot themselves with their service pistols. A third was committed. Their files were sealed under wartime classification. The phonograph disappeared, but a local archivist said she saw it again in a private collection labeled Unresolved Surgical Phenomena. She was found unresponsive a week later, tongue removed. Today, the Walsh estate is surrounded by fencing, surveillance, and silence. No tours, no access, not even satellite imaging is permitted over its roof. But locals say the wind still shifts strangely near the property. Birds refuse to land, and sometimes on cold nights you can hear the metronome ticking. Steady, slow, patient, as if it's still counting. Waiting, the story of the Walsh family was buried by time, shame, and fear. But their legacy remains stitched into the forgotten history of American medicine, where faith was dissected, childhood was inverted, and the soul became just another subject for study. And if you listen closely, beneath the dirt, behind the walls, under the skin, you might still hear the child that never cried, learning how to scream.